guys, it's Sophie and welcome to the next of my Man Booker 2018 reviews. I'm going to be talking today about The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner. The Mars Room follows our main character, Romy Hall, as she is taken into a women's prison. We know very early on that she is serving essentially life without parole. She's got a double life sentence with time on top, so there is no chance that she's going to get out of prison before her death. We know very early on that she's a first-time offender, and the people around her often aren't, but we don't know what it is that she has done. The other fact about Romy that we learn, again toward the very beginning of the book, is that she has a young son called Jackson who she is leaving in the outside world and essentially is never going to be part of his life again. She knows that the thing that she has done has separated her from her son forever, and because of the way the system works, she won't even know who he is anymore. But I think this book is less about Romy and Jackson and more about prisons. And I actually quite enjoyed that. I like reading books around prisons, but I think it would potentially be disappointing if you were looking for her as a character to be developing as much as she could in that situation, because I think, rightly or wrongly, the book is talking a lot about what prisons are and what they do to people. And we use Romy as sort of an example of someone who's in the system and what that changes her into, or how she adapts to that situation, because it's something that she has not got knowledge of historically, and it's something that she is learning about. While she hasn't had the easiest life, she's not been someone who, like a lot of their fellow inmates, have kind of bounced in and out of prison and who expect to be in prison longer than they're out. There are sections where characters describe leaving kind of valuable luxuries that they've gathered in prison, whether that be a spare blanket or whatever, with friends inside, so that when they come back they'll have their things. And it's really just talking about that world. It does talk about sort of important issues in prison. It talks about the experience of transgender men and women in prisons, and the experience of them being placed in prisons that don't match their gender identity, and the ways in which that can be damaging. It also speaks about the way in which people who are cisgender can react poorly to someone who's transgender coming into their prison population, and the danger that those people face, whichever gender they're paired with, almost. It also talks about sex and how sex works in prison, and rape as well, but both. I think I very much have an idea that any sex in prison is necessarily rape, but it talks a little bit about masturbation and about consensual sex in prison as well. And then the other kind of thing it talks about quite a lot is about the kind of work that people in prison do, and the pay they get. And I think especially in the States, that's something that is very important to know and understand, about what people in prisons do and how we benefit as a society for people being in prison. So we're talking about these kind of big issues around prisons, and also little details around what kind of things are luxuries, and how some prisoners might manipulate people on the outside for resources or favours, and how the guards play into that as well. And I think all of this can make the book feel quite detail heavy if you aren't familiar with the prison system, because there can be quite a lot to learn. They're also talking about the things and the lives, the things that people have done and the lives they've led before prison. So if you aren't familiar with, like a criminal background, again, that can be quite a lot to learn. I didn't mind that because I found it quite appealing to dive in and trying to understand. But I can understand that some people might just find that quite frustrating. I think the writing style was very straightforward. I didn't think that it felt particularly lyrical or poetic or really stand out. It was one of those books where you didn't really notice the writing, which I didn't mind. I prefer books which are lyrical and make me kind of stop and go like, wow, that's gorgeous. But I did think it was well written, and I didn't think that the language was boring. I just didn't really notice it. I think it's probably the easiest way to explain it. And I think that's kind of the overview of what's in the book, but I want to talk a little bit just toward the end about the theme, I think, that was most important about this book, which is around forgiveness of people who've committed crimes. I thought that was one of the things the author was trying to do with this book. And just kind of discussing like how dependent is our forgiveness of a person in the system of the crime they've committed. Are there certain things that are unforgivable sins? or is it dependent? And if we knew the situations of everyone who was in prison, would we think differently about how we treat them? I think there's also a kind of underlying discussion, whilst it's not overtly spoken about kind of, does prison work, and do we want it to work? Are we putting people in prison because we think it's going to make us safer, or is it a case of we want them to be punished, we want them to have rubbish time? And I think those two things are very different and important to know, and I don't actually think one of those two things is better than the other. I think that I can understand both, and I can see why people might hold either one of those views, but I do think it's important to know where you stand with regard to prisons, and how your morality sits with that. I'm very much a case of, I want to see less crimes committed overall, and I would hope that that person could be rehabilitated and return to society successfully. I understand emotionally the desire to punish or exclude, but I think my rational brain knows that that isn't probably the most productive way to deal with crime. But I think it's interesting to have a book like this that talks about this, and I think I said in my last video where I spoke about it, I did a dual kind of mini review, that I think this would be a really good book to learn about prisons if you don't like non-fiction. So if you're interested in that, then do give it a shot. I did really enjoy the process of reading it. I read it really quickly, and I would recommend this one. So hopefully that's been interesting and you've learned a little bit about the Mars Room. If you've read it and you liked it, then let me know down below in the comments. Let me know whether you think it's going to stay on the shortlist, or whether this is destined to die on the long list, and I'll chat to you guys soon in my next review video. Bye!